the vast expanse of ancient Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers carved life into an otherwise unforgiving desert landscape, the story of humanity unfolded in cycles of divine promise and human frailty. It was a world where empires rose and fell like desert dust, where gods were many and the true God was known by few. Yet in this crucible of ancient civilization, one family would carry forward a covenant that would reshape the destiny of nations. This is the story of a young man who descended from the heights of favor into the depths of slavery, only to rise again to heights unimaginable. This is the story of Joseph, son of Israel, whose journey from the shepherding hills of Canaan to the glittering palaces of Egypt would become one of the most remarkable tales of survival, faith, and redemption ever recorded. To understand Joseph's extraordinary journey, we must first understand the world into which he was born, and the weight of heritage that rested upon his young shoulders. The second millennium, before the Common Era, was a time of unprecedented movement and upheaval across the ancient Near East. The great Bronze Age civilizations were at their zenith. Egypt, the black land blessed by the annual flooding of the Nile, stood as a beacon of stability and power. Its pharaohs commanded resources and manpower that could raise monuments touching the heavens. The pyramids of Giza, already ancient by Joseph's time, stood as eternal testaments to Egyptian might and ingenuity. To the east, Babylon and the Mesopotamian city-states traded and warred, creating the first great urban civilizations. Between these two poles of power lay the land of Canaan, a narrow corridor of hills, valleys, and coastal plains that served as a bridge between Africa and Asia. It was a land of strategic importance, crossed by trade routes and coveted by empires, and it was here, in this contested landscape, that the family of Abraham had made their home. But this family was no ordinary clan of shepherds and herdsmen. They carried with them a promise that defied the logic of the age. 4 generations before Joseph's birth, a man named Abram had heard a voice. Not the voice of Marduk or Ra, not Baal or Asherah, but the voice of a God who claimed dominion over all creation. This God had made Abram an offer that seemed preposterous. Leave everything familiar, journey to an unknown land, and become the father of a great nation. The promise included land, descendants as numerous as the stars, and a blessing that would somehow extend to all peoples of the earth. Abram, who would become Abraham, accepted this covenant. He left the sophisticated city of Ur, with its ziggurats and schools, its commerce and culture, and became a wanderer. His faith in the invisible God set his family apart in a world saturated with idolatry. His descendants would carry this distinction like a mark upon their souls, sometimes as a burden, sometimes as their greatest strength. Abraham's son Isaac inherited the promise. Isaac's son Jacob, later called Israel, became the father of 12 sons who would give rise to the 12 tribes. And it was Jacob's 11th son, Joseph, born to his beloved wife Rachel, who would prove to be the hinge upon which the entire destiny of this chosen family would turn. The world of Joseph's childhood was shaped by the complex dynamics of a large, polygamous household in an age when family structure determined survival. Jacob had acquired 4 wives through circumstances both intentional and manipulated. Leah, the elder daughter of his uncle Laban, had been substituted for her younger sister Rachel on Jacob's wedding night, forcing him to work an additional 7 years for the woman he truly loved. The 2 sisters, locked in bitter rivalry, had also given Jacob their maidservants, Bilhah and Zilpah, as secondary wives. From these 4 women came 12 sons, each carrying the weight of their mother's status and their father's favoritism. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun were Leah's sons. Dan and Naphtali came through Bilhah, Gad and Asher through Zilpah. But it was Rachel's sons, Joseph and later Benjamin, who captured Jacob's heart most completely. This favoritism would plant seeds of resentment that would nearly destroy the family. Jacob's love for Rachel had been legendary. He had worked 14 years to win her hand, and when she finally bore him a son after years of barrenness, Jacob's joy knew no bounds. He named the boy Joseph, meaning "may he add," expressing hope for additional sons. But more than hope, the name carried Jacob's complete devotion. Joseph would grow up, wrapped in the warmth of his father's excessive love, a warmth that would blind both father and son to the dangers such favoritism created. The household of Jacob was not settled in one place. Like his grandfather Abraham and his father Isaac before him, Jacob was a semi-nomadic pastoralist. His wealth was measured in flocks and herds, in sheep, goats, cattle, and camels. The family moved seasonally, following water and pasture, setting up temporary encampments near wells and springs. They lived in tents woven from goat hair, structures that could be dismantled and transported as needed. Life revolved around the animals. The sons of Jacob were shepherds, an occupation that required skill, endurance, and constant vigilance. Shepherding in ancient Canaan was not the peaceful, pastoral occupation often depicted in romantic imagery. It was dangerous work. Lions and bears prowled the wilderness. Thieves and raiders were a constant threat. The shepherd had to know every fold of the hills, every source of water, every safe passage. He had to be willing to fight for his flock, sometimes to the death. In this world, sons were valuable for their labor. The more sons, the larger the flocks that could be maintained and protected. The boys learned their trade young, starting with small tasks and gradually taking on more responsibility. By Joseph's time, his older brothers were seasoned shepherds, men hardened by sun and wind, capable of traveling far from the main encampment with portions of the flock. But Joseph's upbringing was different. As the favored son, he was often kept close to his father, while his brothers spent weeks in distant pastures. Sleeping under stars and battling the elements, Joseph remained in the relative comfort of the main camp. This separation, this difference in treatment, festered like a wound in the hearts of his brothers. The breaking point came when Joseph was 17 years old. Jacob, in an act of stunning insensitivity or perhaps willful blindness to family dynamics, gave Joseph a special garment. The exact nature of this garment has been debated by scholars for millennia. Some translations call it a coat of many colors, others a richly ornamented robe, still others a long robe with sleeves. What matters is not the precise description but the symbolic weight it carried. In the ancient Near East, clothing was a marker of status. Working men wore simple tunics that allowed freedom of movement. The garment Jacob gave Joseph was clearly something different, whether through its colors, achieved by expensive dyes, or through its length and ornamentation. It marked Joseph as someone set apart from manual labor. It was the kind of garment worn by nobility, by those who supervised rather than worked, by favorites and heirs. To Joseph's brothers, watching their father drape this special robe over their younger brother's shoulders, the message was unmistakable and unbearable. Joseph, younger than most of them, inexperienced in the hard realities of their shepherding life, was being elevated above them all. The coat was not merely a gift. It was a declaration of preferential inheritance, a visible repudiation of the traditional birthright that should have gone to Reuben, the firstborn. The brothers' hatred, already simmering, now boiled over. The text records with stark simplicity that they could not speak a kind word to him. The family was fracturing along a fault line that Jacob's favoritism had created. Into this volatile situation, Joseph, with the naivety of youth and privilege, poured fuel on the fire. He began to dream. Dreams in the ancient world carried weight and significance far beyond our modern understanding. They were considered messages from the divine realm, windows into future realities, warnings or promises that demanded attention. When Joseph experienced two dreams of remarkable similarity and clarity, he could not keep silent about them. In the first dream, Joseph and his brothers were binding sheaves of grain in the field. Suddenly, Joseph's sheaf stood upright while his brothers' sheaves gathered around and bowed down to it. The symbolism was transparent and offensive. Joseph saw himself elevated above his brothers, receiving their homage, standing while they prostrated themselves. If Joseph had possessed any social awareness, any understanding of the resentment already poisoning his relationships, he would have kept this dream to himself. Instead, he shared it with his brothers. Their response was predictable. Their hatred deepened. They asked him bitterly if he expected to actually rule over them, to be their king. The very idea was absurd and infuriating. But Joseph, undeterred, experienced another dream. This time, the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed down to him. Again he shared this dream, this time in the presence of his father. Even Jacob, who loved Joseph beyond reason, was taken aback. He rebuked his son, asking whether Joseph truly expected his father, mother, and brothers to bow to the ground before him. Rachel, Joseph's mother, had died giving birth to Benjamin, so the reference to the moon bowing might have referred to Leah or to Bilhah, who had helped raise Joseph. Yet despite his rebuke, Jacob kept the matter in mind. Something about these dreams resonated, disturbed, intrigued. Perhaps Jacob, who had himself experienced divine dreams and encounters throughout his life, recognized something genuine in Joseph's visions. Perhaps he sensed that the God of Abraham and Isaac was at work, weaving purposes beyond human understanding. The brothers, however, had no such reflective thoughts. Their envy now turned murderous. The landscape of Canaan in which these events unfolded was a study in contrasts. The central hill country, where Jacob's clan often camped, was characterized by limestone, ridges, and valleys, terraced for agriculture. Ancient olive groves and vineyards clung to the hillsides. Springs emerged from the rock, creating oases of green in an otherwise brown landscape during the dry summer months. To the east, the land dropped dramatically into the Jordan Valley, a geological rift that would extend all the way to the Dead Sea and beyond into Africa. To the west lay the coastal plains and eventually the Mediterranean Sea, though the Canaanite city-states controlled most of the coastal region. The family of Jacob existed on the margins of this settled world. They were not city dwellers. They maintained a careful distance from the Canaanite population, with their foreign gods and different customs. Yet they were not completely isolated. They traded with the cities, selling wool and animal products, buying grain and goods they could not produce themselves. They were aware of the broader currents of politics and power that flowed through the region. Egypt, to the southwest, was entering what historians would later call the Second Intermediate Period, a time of foreign influence and eventual foreign rule. The Great Middle Kingdom had declined and Egypt was fragmenting. Semitic peoples from the northeast, called the Hyksos by later Egyptian chroniclers, were infiltrating the Nile Delta, bringing new technologies, and eventually establishing their own dynasties. This political fluidity would create the very conditions that would make Joseph's rise possible, though none of this was apparent yet. To the north and east, the great kingdoms of Mesopotamia were engaged in their eternal competitions. Trade routes crisscrossed Canaan, carrying precious goods, cultural exchange, and occasionally armies. Caravans of merchants were a common sight, their camels loaded with spices, textiles, and luxury items destined for Egyptian markets. It was against this backdrop of a world in motion, of empires rising and falling, of trade and conflict and cultural exchange, that the small drama of Jacob's dysfunctional family played out. Yet this family drama would have consequences far beyond what anyone could imagine. The crisis came to a head on what seemed like an ordinary day. Jacob's older sons had taken the flocks to find pasture near Shechem, a considerable distance from the main encampment at Hebron. Shechem was a significant location in the family's history. It was near Shechem that Jacob had first arrived when returning from his years with Laban. It was at Shechem that his daughter Dinah had been violated, and where his sons Simeon and Levi had taken brutal revenge, slaughtering the men of the city. The memory of that violence still hung over the region. Jacob, perhaps growing anxious about his son's prolonged absence, made a fateful decision. He would send Joseph to check on his brothers and bring back word of their welfare. It was a reasonable request from a father's perspective, but it betrayed a stunning blindness to the reality of his family's internal dynamics. Joseph, obedient and perhaps still naive about the depth of his brother's hatred, set out on the journey. He traveled north through the hills, a young man in his distinctive robe, searching for his brothers. When he arrived at Shechem, he found the grazing lands empty. The flocks had moved on. Lost and uncertain, Joseph encountered a man who told him the brothers had gone to Dothan, further north. Dothan sat in a strategic location, a fertile valley on the trade route between Damascus and Egypt. It was good grazing land, but it was also closer to the major caravan routes. Joseph, unknowing, continued his search. Meanwhile, in the fields around Dothan, his brothers spotted him in the distance. Even from afar, that special robe was unmistakable, and in that moment of recognition, years of resentment crystallized into murderous intent. "Here comes the dreamer," they said to one another. The contempt in their words was palpable. The dreams had become Joseph's defining characteristic in their eyes, the symbol of his arrogance and their father's unjust favoritism. And now, far from their father's protective presence, far from witnesses, an opportunity presented itself. The older brothers began to plot Joseph's murder. They would kill him, throw his body into one of the many cisterns that dotted the landscape, and tell Jacob that a wild animal had devoured him. The dreams, they reasoned, would die with the dreamer. The problem of Joseph's existence, of his favored status and presumptuous visions, would be solved. But Reuben, the firstborn, pulled back from the brink of fratricide. His motives were complex. Perhaps some vestige of brotherly feeling remained. Perhaps as the eldest, he felt a responsibility to prevent bloodshed. The text suggests he intended to rescue Joseph later and return him to their father, possibly hoping to regain some of Jacob's favor, which he had lost through his own earlier transgression with his father's concubine. Reuben proposed an alternative. Instead of killing Joseph outright, they should throw him into a cistern alive. These cisterns were deep pits carved into the limestone bedrock to collect and store rainwater during the wet season. By this time of year, many would be dry deep enough to trap someone, but not immediately fatal. The brothers agreed to this modification of their plan. When Joseph arrived, breathless and unsuspecting, his brothers seized him with sudden violence. They stripped off the hated robe, that symbol of favoritism and privilege. The garment that had marked him as special now marked him as a target. They dragged him to a nearby cistern and threw him down into its depths. The physical and emotional trauma of this moment is difficult to fully grasp. Joseph, who had lived his entire life cocooned in his father's love, suddenly found himself in a pit, looking up at the faces of his own brothers, seeing in their eyes not love but hatred. The shock, the fear, the bewilderment must have been overwhelming. He called out to them, pleaded with them, but they turned away. Then, in an act of stunning callousness, they sat down to eat a meal. The casual cruelty of this detail reveals the depth of their hardened hearts. Their brother was in a pit, crying out for mercy, and they were eating bread and cheese as if nothing unusual had occurred. It was while they were eating that they saw the caravan approaching. The morning sun breaks over Potiphar's estate, casting long shadows across courtyards where Egyptian servants already move with practiced efficiency. In one of these courtyards, a young Hebrew slave begins his day with no knowledge that within these very walls his destiny will be forged through fire and temptation, through loyalty tested and virtue rewarded in ways he cannot yet imagine. Joseph, sold into bondage by his own brothers, finds himself in a household that represents the pinnacle of Egyptian military power. Captain Potiphar commands the guard of Pharaoh himself, a position that places him among the most trusted and powerful men in all of Egypt. The household buzzes with activity. Servants carry water from wells, grind grain for bread, prepare oils and perfumes, tend to livestock, maintain weapons and armor. It is a small empire unto itself, this estate of a military commander. And into this world Joseph enters as the lowest of the low, a foreign slave purchased from Midianite traders, bearing no credentials, no references, nothing but the clothes on his back, and the invisible hand of God upon his life. At first, he is assigned the most menial tasks. He hauls water, cleans stables, performs the work that even other slaves consider beneath their station. But something becomes evident within days, something that cannot be hidden or suppressed. Whatever Joseph touches seems to flourish. The gardens he tends produce more abundantly. The livestock he cares for grow healthier and multiply. The stores he organizes remain fresh longer, with less waste. It is as if an invisible blessing follows him, touching everything within his sphere of influence. Potiphar is not a man who rises to command Pharaoh's guard through blindness or stupidity. He built his career on the ability to assess men quickly and accurately, to recognize talent and potential where others see only surface appearances. He watches this Hebrew slave with growing interest. The young man works with an intensity that sets him apart. But it is more than mere diligence. There is intelligence in how Joseph approaches every task, finding efficient methods, anticipating needs before they are spoken, understanding the rhythms and requirements of the household with remarkable speed. Within weeks, Joseph is given oversight of other slaves. Within months, he manages entire sections of the household. His fellow servants, initially resentful of this foreign upstart's rapid advancement, find themselves grudgingly respecting his fairness, his wisdom, his ability to organize work in ways that benefit everyone. He does not lord his growing authority over others. Instead, he serves with the same dedication, whether the task is grand or humble. The Hebrew God, unseen but ever present, pours blessing upon this household because of Joseph's presence. Potiphar's wealth multiplies, his business ventures prosper, his standing at court rises even higher, and the master of the house, pragmatic soldier that he is, recognizes the source. He sees that this blessing follows Joseph specifically, that prosperity attends the young Hebrew like a faithful shadow. So Potiphar makes a decision that would shock many in Egyptian society. He elevates Joseph to the position of chief steward, placing the entire management of his household and business affairs into the hands of this Hebrew slave. It is an extraordinary act of trust, one that speaks to both Potiphar's wisdom and Joseph's demonstrated character. From this moment forward, Potiphar concerns himself only with the food he eats. Everything else, every other aspect of his extensive holdings, rests in Joseph's capable hands. Joseph is perhaps 20 years old now, no longer the 17-year-old boy thrown into a pit by his brothers. The years of slavery have refined him, matured him, transformed the dreamer into a man of substance and capability. He is handsome, this young Hebrew, striking in appearance, carrying himself with a dignity that transcends his slave status. His physical presence commands attention, but it is his character that truly sets him apart. In a culture rife with corruption, he proves incorruptible. In a system built on exploitation, he deals justly. In a world where slaves routinely steal from masters, he demonstrates absolute integrity. The household flourishes under his management. Potiphar's wealth grows to levels that astonish even his peers at court. Fields produce record harvests. Trade ventures yield extraordinary returns. The estate becomes a model of efficiency and prosperity. And through it all, Joseph remains faithful to his master, faithful to his God, faithful to the principles instilled in him during those early years in Canaan, when his father Jacob told him stories of Abraham, of Isaac, of the covenant promises that seemed so distant now. But prosperity and blessing do not exempt anyone from testing. Indeed, they often invite it. In the quiet luxury of Potiphar's house, a different kind of danger begins to take shape, one far more insidious than any Joseph has yet faced. Potiphar's wife notices the Hebrew steward. How could she not? He moves through her household with authority and grace, this young man who manages everything with such skill. She sees how servants respect him, how her husband trusts him implicitly, how he carries himself with quiet confidence. Day after day, she watches him, and what begins as idle notice transforms into something darker, more obsessive. She is a woman of privilege and power, accustomed to having her desires met. Her husband, though wealthy and respected, spends much of his time at court or with military duties. The marriage, arranged for political and social advantage as most Egyptian unions are, lacks passion, lacks intimacy. She finds herself increasingly alone in a house filled with servants, surrounded by luxury yet starved for attention, for excitement, for desire. And there is Joseph, young and handsome and capable, moving through her world with a presence that becomes impossible for her to ignore. She begins to manufacture excuses to speak with him, to summon him for increasingly trivial matters. She pays more attention to her appearance when she knows he will be present. Her questions about household matters become longer, more drawn out, laden with implications that grow less and less subtle. Joseph, focused on his duties and faithful to his master, initially misses these signs or chooses to ignore them, hoping the situation will resolve itself. He has built something remarkable here, a position of trust and responsibility that seemed impossible when he first arrived as a freshly purchased slave. He will not betray that trust, will not compromise the integrity that has brought him this far. But Potiphar's wife grows bolder. The hints become open invitations. The subtle glances transform into direct propositions. One day, when the house is quiet and other servants are occupied elsewhere, she approaches him directly. Her words cut through any possible misunderstanding, stripping away all pretense. She wants him. She desires him. She invites him to her bed. The moment crystallizes everything. Joseph stands at a crossroads where many men would stumble, where the path of least resistance leads directly to destruction. She is beautiful. She is powerful. She is offering herself to him. And who would know? Her husband is away. The servants are occupied. In a culture where masters routinely use slaves for their pleasure, where such relationships, however unequal and wrong, are commonplace, who would condemn him? But Joseph's response reveals the depth of his character, the foundation of his integrity. He refuses, and not with vague excuses or diplomatic evasions. He lays out the moral reality with crystal clarity. His master has entrusted him with everything, has withheld nothing from his authority except his own wife. How then could Joseph do such a wicked thing? How could he sin against God? Notice the order of Joseph's reasoning. He first acknowledges this trust Potiphar has placed in him, the violation of human relationships that such an act would represent. But then he goes deeper to the ultimate reality. This would be sin against God, not just against Potiphar, not just against social convention, but against the divine standard of righteousness. Joseph, a slave in a foreign land, far from family and homeland, still lives in the consciousness that God sees, God knows, God cares about human choices. His refusal enrages and humiliates Potiphar's wife, but it does not end the matter. Rejection only inflames her desire. Day after day, she continues her pursuit. The propositions become demands. The invitations transform into entitlements. She uses her position, her power, the authority she holds as mistress of the house, to create opportunities, to corner him, to press her case with increasing desperation. Joseph finds himself in an impossible situation. He cannot report her behavior to Potiphar without potentially destroying the household, without calling his master's honor into question. Egyptian society places enormous emphasis on honor and reputation. For Potiphar, to learn that his wife pursues a Hebrew slave with such abandon would humiliate him publicly, would make him a laughingstock among his peers. Yet Joseph also cannot simply submit. His integrity, his faithfulness to God, his loyalty to his master all forbid it. So he does what he can. He avoids her. He arranges his duties to minimize private encounters. He ensures other servants are present when household matters require her involvement. He creates distance, builds barriers, protects himself through practical wisdom while maintaining his responsibilities. It is a delicate dance, growing more difficult and dangerous with each passing day. Then comes the day when circumstance and opportunity align in the worst possible way. Some festival or holy day has drawn most of the household servants away. The great house stands unusually quiet, with only essential staff remaining. Joseph, unaware of how empty the house has become, enters to attend to his duties. She has been waiting for precisely such a moment. When Joseph crosses the threshold, she is there, and this time she moves beyond words. She grabs his garment, physically seizing him, her proposition now a demand backed by physical force. Her voice carries the imperious authority of someone accustomed to obedience. "Come to bed with me." Joseph faces a split-second decision. No one else is present. Her word against his, her power against his slavery, her honor, such as it is, against his foreign status. But the decision is already made, has been made every day he has refused her advances, has been forged in the crucible of his character from childhood onward. He pulls away with such force that his garment tears free from her grasp, and he flees. He runs from the house, leaving the garment behind, choosing honor over comfort, choosing God over self-preservation, choosing to face whatever consequences may come rather than compromise his integrity. The woman stands there, holding the evidence of what she will claim is attempted rape, and in the toxic alchemy of rejected lust, humiliation, and wounded pride, she begins to scream. She summons the servants, and when they arrive, she weaves a lie that will destroy Joseph's life. "That Hebrew slave," she shrieks, "the one your master brought to us, he came in here to mock us, to rape me." I screamed, and he ran, leaving his garment behind. The servants stand uncertainly, knowing Joseph, knowing his character, but also knowing the power dynamics at play. Who will believe a Hebrew slave against the word of their mistress? Who will risk their own position by questioning her account? The seeds of doubt are there. They have all seen how Joseph conducts himself, how he maintains strict propriety. But they also understand survival in this world of Egyptian hierarchy and power. When Potiphar returns home, his wife has refined her story, added emotional details, worked herself into a state of righteous fury. She shows him the garment. She recounts the alleged assault, and crucially, she frames it not just as personal violation, but as public humiliation. "That Hebrew slave you brought into our house came to mock me, to dishonor you." She makes it about her husband's honor, about his judgment, about the shame of having trusted a foreign slave who would dare to assault his master's wife. Potiphar faces an impossible situation. He knows Joseph. He has watched this young man transform his household, has witnessed firsthand the integrity and capability that Joseph brings to every task. The accusation seems utterly inconsistent with everything he has observed. Yet his wife stands before him, tearful and furious, holding physical evidence, telling a story that follows a pattern familiar in Egyptian society, where slaves sometimes do presume beyond their station. More than that, Potiphar understands the public dimension. If word of this spreads, if it becomes known at court that his own slave attempted to assault his wife, his honor will be irrevocably damaged. His peers will question his judgment. His enemies will use it against him. His carefully built reputation, his standing as captain of Pharaoh's guard, all of it hangs in the balance. The text tells us simply that Potiphar's anger burned. Against whom? The Hebrew translates, suggest ambiguity. Perhaps against Joseph, perhaps against his wife, perhaps against the entire situation. But regardless of where his private suspicions lie, public necessity demands action. He cannot ignore this accusation. He cannot appear weak or uncertain. He must respond, and respond decisively. So Joseph is seized, stripped of his authority, and thrown into prison. Not just any prison, but the royal prison where the king's prisoners are confined. It is a curious detail, this mention of where Joseph is imprisoned. If Potiphar truly believed his wife's accusation, if he genuinely thought Joseph guilty of attempted rape, Egyptian law would demand far harsher punishment. Death would be the expected sentence for a slave who dared assault his master's wife. Yet Joseph lives. He is imprisoned, yes, removed from the household and from any position of authority, but he lives. Perhaps Potiphar's choice of punishment reveals his private doubts. By sending Joseph to the royal prison rather than executing him, by choosing the facility where he himself, as captain of the guard, has oversight, Potiphar perhaps preserves Joseph's life while satisfying public necessity. It is an act that might contain both justice and mercy, both political necessity and personal doubt. But Joseph understands none of this nuance as prison doors close behind him. He who has committed no wrong finds himself punished. He who maintained absolute integrity finds himself condemned. He who trusted God and remained faithful to his master finds himself in chains. The injustice must feel overwhelming, crushing. From favored son to slave was bitter enough. From trusted steward to prisoner feels like a final, cruel joke. The prison is harsh, dark, filled with men who have genuinely offended Pharaoh or violated Egyptian law. Some await execution, others serve indefinite sentences. The conditions are brutal by any standard. Yet here, in this place of punishment and despair, the pattern repeats. The Lord is with Joseph. That simple phrase, repeated now, for the third time in his story, carries profound weight. In his father's house, God was with him. In Potiphar's house, God was with him. And now, in prison, God is with him still. The warden, hardened by years of managing dangerous criminals, notices something unusual about this new Hebrew prisoner. Joseph does not rage against his circumstances. He does not plot revenge or wallow in self-pity. Instead, he does what he has always done. He serves. He works. He brings order and capability to whatever sphere he occupies. And the warden, like Potiphar before him, recognizes something special in this young man. Within time, Joseph rises even in prison. The warden places the entire prison under Joseph's management. Once again, everything is left in his hands. Once again, the text emphasizes that the warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Consider the extraordinary nature of this pattern. 3 times now, Joseph has been stripped of everything and thrown into circumstances beyond his control. 3 times, he has risen through character and capability. 3 times, those in authority over him have recognized something special and elevated him to positions of trust. He adapts without compromising. He serves without servility. He maintains integrity regardless of circumstance. But prison is still prison. Days turn to weeks, weeks to months, months to years. Joseph, now in his 20s, watches time pass within stone walls. The dreams of his youth, those vivid visions of his brothers bowing before him, seem increasingly absurd. How can a forgotten prisoner fulfill such destiny? What future can exist for someone condemned on false charges, imprisoned unjustly, remembered by no one who matters? Then circumstances at the highest levels of Egyptian power create ripples that will eventually reach into Joseph's prison cell. Two officials of Pharaoh's court, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, somehow offend their royal master. The offense is not specified in the text, which heightens the sense of arbitrary power that surrounds Pharaoh. These are not minor servants, but high officials, men who daily attend the king, who hold positions of intimate trust and access. Yet something they do, some failure of duty or breach of protocol, or perhaps mere suspicion of disloyalty, results in their immediate arrest and imprisonment. Potiphar, as captain of the guard, oversees the royal prison, and in a detail that seems almost casual but carries profound significance, he assigns Joseph to attend these two officials. Think about what this reveals. Joseph, despite being a prisoner himself, has risen to such a position of trust that the warden assigns him to personally serve high-ranking officials. Even in chains, even in disgrace, his capability and character shine through. The cupbearer and the baker find themselves in utterly foreign circumstances. These are men accustomed to luxury, to power, to the refined atmosphere of Pharaoh's court. Now they inhabit a prison cell, facing uncertain futures, wondering whether they will be restored to favor or executed. The mental and emotional toll is crushing. They exist in limbo, neither fully condemned nor freed, suspended between life and death by Pharaoh's whim. One morning, Joseph comes to attend them and immediately notices something wrong. Both men wear expressions of deep stress, troubled in a way that goes beyond mere imprisonment. He asks them directly, without preamble or pretense, "Why do your faces look so sad today?" Their answer reveals much about Egyptian culture and belief. "We both had dreams," they tell him, "and there is no one to interpret them." In the Egyptian worldview, dreams carry enormous significance. They are messages from the gods, windows into fate, glimpses of future events. Professional dream interpreters hold important positions in Egyptian society, are consulted by kings and commoners alike. But here in prison, these officials have no access to such experts. Their dreams trouble them precisely because they cannot understand what the gods are trying to communicate. Joseph's response marks a crucial moment. "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." He does not claim personal power or mystical ability. He points beyond himself to God, to the source of true knowledge and revelation. Yet he also invites them to share, confident that the same God who granted dreams to him in his youth, the same God who has preserved him through slavery and false accusation and imprisonment, can provide understanding of these dreams as well. The cupbearer speaks first. In his dream, he saw a vine with 3 branches. The branches budded, blossomed, and produced ripe grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in his hand, and he took the grapes, squeezed them into the cup, and placed it in Pharaoh's hand. A simple dream, straightforward in its imagery, yet laden with meaning for this official, whose very identity is bound up in his service to the king. Joseph interprets without hesitation. The 3 branches represent 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up the cupbearer's head, will restore him to his former position. He will once again place Pharaoh's cup in his hand, will resume his duties as if the imprisonment never occurred. It is a message of hope, of restoration, of return to favor. But Joseph adds something more, something deeply personal. He makes a request. When you are restored, when you return to Pharaoh's court and resume your position of influence, remember me. Mention me to Pharaoh. Tell him about me. For I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon. The request reveals Joseph's humanity. He is not some superhuman figure immune to despair or resignation. He longs for freedom, for justice, for vindication. He has maintained faith and integrity, not from lack of desire for better circumstances, but despite the pain of his situation. And now, seeing an opportunity, he grasps at it. Perhaps this official, restored to power, can be his advocate, can bring his case before Pharaoh, can secure his release from this unjust imprisonment. The chief baker, hearing this positive interpretation, takes courage and shares his dream as well. He saw 3 baskets of bread on his head. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but birds were eating them out of the basket on his head. He waits hopefully for Joseph to deliver equally good news. But Joseph's interpretation brings no comfort. The 3 baskets also represent 3 days, but within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off the baker's head, will hang him on a pole, and birds will eat away his flesh. It is a pronouncement of death, stark and terrible. Joseph does not soften it or offer false hope. The dream carries a message, and he delivers that message faithfully, regardless of how unwelcome it may be. The years pass in Egypt like the slow turning of grinding stones, each rotation wearing away at Joseph until only the essential core remains. 22 years old when he entered Potiphar's house, he is now nearly 30, his youth consumed in the furnace of slavery and imprisonment. Yet something extraordinary happens within the walls of that Egyptian dungeon. Where bitterness might have taken root, where rage against his brothers and despair over his fate might have poisoned his soul, Joseph instead develops an almost supernatural serenity. The dreams that once seemed like cruel mockeries have not faded, but transformed into something deeper, something patient. The prison where Joseph languishes is not merely a holding cell, but a place where the unwanted are forgotten. Political prisoners mix with common criminals. The air hangs thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and desperation. Men enter these gates and simply disappear from memory, their names erased from the lips of their families, their existence reduced to a notation in some forgotten ledger. Yet Joseph does not disappear. The keeper of the prison, seeing something indefinable in this Hebrew slave, places the daily operations increasingly in his hands. It is an echo of Potiphar's trust, a pattern repeating itself like those mysterious dreams. Then comes a morning that will change everything. Though Joseph does not know it yet, 2 new prisoners arrive, men whose very presence causes a stir among the guards and inmates alike. One is Pharaoh's chief cupbearer, the other his chief baker. These are not ordinary servants, but men who stood daily in the presence of absolute power, who tasted the king's wine and prepared his bread, whose positions required absolute trust, because they could so easily become instruments of assassination. Something has gone terribly wrong in the palace, some suspicion has fallen upon them, and now they find themselves in the same prison as a forgotten Hebrew slave. Joseph watches them with interest. These men accustomed to luxury, now thrust into degradation. He sees how they move through the prison, with the bearing of those who expect their situation to be temporary, who still carry themselves as if wearing fine linen rather than prison rags. He tends to their needs, as he tends to all the prisoners under his care, but he notices when their demeanor changes, when confusion and distress cloud their features. On a particular morning, Joseph finds both men sitting in unusual silence, their faces troubled in a way that speaks of something beyond their imprisonment. The cupbearer stares at the wall as if seeing through it to some other realm. The baker wrings his hands with barely contained anxiety. Joseph, who has learned to read men's faces in the subtle hierarchies of servitude, approaches them with concern. They have both dreamed in the night, they tell him, and their dreams carry a weight that ordinary dreams do not possess. In Egypt, dreams are considered messages from the gods, portals through which divine knowledge flows into the mortal realm. There is an entire priestly class devoted to their interpretation, elaborate systems of symbols and meanings passed down through generations. But here in prison, there are no dream interpreters, no priests to consult, and the dreams sit heavy on their hearts like stones. Joseph listens to their distress, and something stirs within him, something that has lain dormant through all his years of slavery and imprisonment. He hears himself saying words that seem to come from a source beyond himself. Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams. It is a remarkable statement, audacious in its simplicity. Joseph is not claiming to be a magician or a priest. He is pointing to something higher, acknowledging a source of wisdom beyond human learning. The cupbearer speaks first, his voice carrying the particular clarity that dreams sometimes leave behind. In his dream, he saw a vine before him with 3 branches. As he watched, the vine budded, then blossomed, then produced clusters of ripe grapes. He was holding Pharaoh's cup in his hand, and he took the grapes and squeezed them into the cup, then placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand, just as he used to do in his days of service. Joseph does not hesitate. The interpretation forms in his mind with perfect clarity, as if he is reading words written in fire. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up the cupbearer's head and restore him to his former position. He will once again place Pharaoh's cup in his hand, will once again stand in the presence of power and privilege. The cupbearer's face transforms with hope, and Joseph sees his opportunity. He speaks quickly, urgently, asking the cupbearer to remember him when things go well, to mention him to Pharaoh, to help secure his release from this prison. Joseph explains his situation with careful honesty. He was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, he says, and even here in Egypt he has done nothing to deserve imprisonment. It is a plea born of desperation and hope, a reaching out across the barrier that separates the forgotten from the remembered. Encouraged by Joseph's interpretation for the cupbearer, the chief baker shares his own dream. In it he carried 3 baskets of bread on his head. The top basket was filled with all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but birds were eating from the basket on his head, devouring what was meant for the king. The interpretation comes to Joseph just as clearly as the first, but this time the words are harder to speak. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off the baker's head, will hang him on a pole, and birds will eat his flesh. It is a death sentence, delivered through the mysterious language of dreams, and Joseph must speak it, knowing the horror it will bring. 3 days later, on Pharaoh's birthday, a great feast is prepared throughout Egypt. It is customary on such occasions for the king to show mercy or render judgment, to demonstrate his absolute power over life and death. Pharaoh summons both his imprisoned servants. The cupbearer is restored to his position, just as Joseph said. The baker is executed, just as Joseph predicted. The dreams have proven true in every detail, manifesting in reality exactly as they were revealed in vision. But the cupbearer, restored to his position of privilege and power, forgets Joseph. Days pass, then weeks, then months. The cupbearer tastes wine and serves Pharaoh and goes about his duties. And the Hebrew prisoner who interpreted his dream fades from his memory like morning mist. Joseph remains in prison, his hope of release evaporating like water in the Egyptian sun. It is perhaps the cruelest turn yet in his long descent. To have his gift recognized, to have it proven true, and then to be forgotten anyway, speaks to a depth of injustice that might break a lesser man. 2 more years pass. Joseph is now past 30, the prime of his life spent in bondage and imprisonment. If he has kept count of the years since his brothers threw him in that cistern, he knows that 13 years have elapsed. 13 years of slavery and false accusation and forgotten promises. Yet something is building in the unseen realm, forces converging that will shatter the walls of Joseph's prison more completely than any human intervention could manage. Pharaoh himself begins to dream. The king of Egypt, the living God, the absolute ruler of the mightiest kingdom on earth, is troubled by visions in the night. In his first dream, he stands by the Nile River, that great arterial flow that is the very life of Egypt. From the river emerge 7 cows, sleek and fat and beautiful, and they graze among the reeds. Then 7 other cows emerge, ugly and gaunt and emaciated, and these wretched creatures devour the fat cows. Yet even after consuming them, the thin cows remain as gaunt as before, showing no sign of the abundance they have consumed. Pharaoh wakes disturbed, but falls asleep again, and the second dream comes. This time he sees a single stalk of grain producing 7 heads, full and good and ripe with promise. Then 7 other heads sprout, thin and scorched by the east wind, and these withered heads swallow up the 7 good heads. When morning comes, Pharaoh's spirit is troubled in a way that his servants have never seen. These are not ordinary dreams that fade with waking. They carry the weight of divine communication, the sense that the gods are speaking, and their message is urgent. Pharaoh summons all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. These are the masters of dream interpretation, the guardians of ancient wisdom, men who have spent their lives studying the language of the gods. The court fills with them, priests and scholars and practitioners of the sacred arts. Pharaoh tells them his dreams, and they stand in silence. They offer various interpretations, conflicting theories, uncertain speculation. But Pharaoh knows, with the instinct of one who holds absolute power, that none of them truly understand. None can speak with authority. None can pierce the veil that separates these visions from their meaning. A divine message has been sent, and Egypt's greatest minds cannot read it. It is at this moment of national crisis that the cupbearer's memory finally awakens. Standing in the court, watching the most learned men of Egypt fumble in confusion, he remembers a Hebrew slave in prison who spoke with absolute certainty about dreams. He remembers his own dream and the baker's dream, and how everything came to pass exactly as this slave predicted. The cupbearer's conscience strikes him like a physical blow. He approaches Pharaoh and speaks words that will change the course of history. "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings," the cupbearer says, and he tells the story. When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and imprisoned them, both he and the baker had dreams on the same night. A young Hebrew slave was there, a servant of the captain of the guard, and he interpreted their dreams, giving each man his own interpretation. And it all came true exactly as he said. Pharaoh does not hesitate. "Send for this Hebrew immediately." Runners are dispatched to the prison, and Joseph is brought out with urgent haste. But before he can appear before Pharaoh, there are preparations to be made. 13 years of imprisonment have left their mark. Joseph must be shaved according to Egyptian custom, must exchange his prison garments for clean clothes. The transformation is swift but significant. The man who emerges to stand before Pharaoh is no longer visibly the same frightened 17-year-old who was sold to the Ishmaelites. Joseph stands in the throne room of Pharaoh, in the presence of absolute earthly power. The walls are covered with hieroglyphs and images of gods. The air is thick with incense. Priests and officials line the room, their faces painted and adorned according to their rank. And on the throne sits Pharaoh himself, the living Horus, the god-king of Egypt, troubled by dreams that his own wise men cannot interpret. Pharaoh speaks directly to Joseph. "I have had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." It is a statement heavy with expectation and desperation. The most powerful man in the world is looking to a Hebrew slave for wisdom. Joseph's response is immediate and revealing. "I cannot do it," he says, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. It is a statement of profound humility and profound faith. Joseph does not claim the gift for himself, does not use this moment to elevate his own status. Instead, he points beyond himself to the same source he acknowledged in prison. After 13 years of suffering, after being forgotten by those he helped, after every human support has failed him, Joseph's first words in the throne room point to God. Pharaoh tells his dreams again, this time to this unusual Hebrew who stands before him with such strange confidence. The 7 fat cows and the 7 gaunt cows, the 7 good heads of grain and the 7 scorched heads. As Pharaoh speaks, something happens in Joseph's mind. The interpretation does not come as a puzzle to be solved, but as a revelation to be received. He sees with absolute clarity what the dreams mean, and more than that, he sees what must be done. Joseph begins to speak, and his words carry the weight of divine authority. The 2 dreams are one dream, he explains, God showing Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows and 7 good heads of grain represent 7 years of great abundance coming upon Egypt. The 7 gaunt cows and 7 scorched heads represent 7 years of famine that will follow. The abundance will be so great that it will seem limitless, but the famine will be so severe that the abundance will be completely forgotten. The fact that the dream came to Pharaoh twice means that the matter has been firmly decided by God and will happen soon. It is a staggering prophecy. 7 years of unprecedented prosperity followed by 7 years of catastrophic famine. The rhythm of Egyptian agriculture depends on the Nile's annual flooding, but Joseph is describing something beyond normal variation. He is speaking of abundance that will overflow every storehouse, followed by scarcity that will threaten the survival of nations. But Joseph does not stop with interpretation. In a move that reveals both boldness and wisdom accumulated through suffering, he offers counsel to Pharaoh. Let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food will be a reserve for the 7 years of famine, so that the country may not be ruined. It is an audacious proposal. Joseph, a slave standing in chains before the throne, is essentially outlining a complete reorganization of Egypt's agricultural economy. He is proposing a massive program of taxation and storage, a nationwide infrastructure project that will require unprecedented administrative coordination. He is speaking as if he has the right to advise the ruler of the known world on matters of state. The plan seems good to Pharaoh and to all his officials, but more than that, something in Joseph himself impresses the Egyptian court. Pharaoh asks his advisors a question that hangs in the air like incense smoke. Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh turns to Joseph and speaks words that will reverse 13 years of injustice in a single moment. Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. The transformation is instantaneous and total. Pharaoh removes his signet ring from his own finger and places it on Joseph's finger, clothing him with robes of fine linen and placing a gold chain around his neck. Joseph is given a chariot to ride in, second only to Pharaoh's own, and men run before him, shouting, "Make way." He is appointed over the entire land of Egypt, given authority second only to the king himself. Joseph is 30 years old. From the pit to Potiphar's house to prison to the throne room of Egypt, the arc of his journey has traced a pattern that seems almost impossible. The boy who dreamed of sheaves bowing down and stars offering homage has become the second most powerful man in the ancient world. Yet the path to this elevation has stripped away any trace of youthful arrogance. The Joseph who stands in Pharaoh's court is not the Joseph who boasted to his brothers. He has been refined by suffering, humbled by betrayal, matured by injustice. Pharaoh gives Joseph an Egyptian name, Zaphnath-Paneah, and gives him Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, as his wife. The integration into Egyptian society is complete. Joseph begins his work immediately, traveling throughout Egypt to implement the plan that came to him in the throne room. He is no longer merely interpreting dreams but fulfilling them, becoming the instrument through which divine revelation takes physical form. The 7 years of abundance begin exactly as predicted. The land produces crops in such quantities that they seem beyond measure. In every region of Egypt, grain grows with supernatural fertility. Joseph implements his system with the administrative genius that first manifested in Potiphar's household and then in the prison. He establishes storage cities throughout Egypt, massive granaries that begin to fill with wheat and barley. The quantities are so vast that Joseph eventually stops keeping records because the grain is like the sand of the sea, beyond measuring. During these years of plenty before the famine arrives, 2 sons are born to Joseph and Asenath. He names the firstborn Naseh, saying, "God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." The name is revealing. It suggests that Joseph has found a way to release the bitterness of his past, though whether he has truly forgotten or merely found peace with remembrance remains unclear. The second son he names Ephraim, saying, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." Both names point to divine action, to God's hand moving in Joseph's life, despite and through his years of affliction. The 7 years of abundance pass like a dream themselves, and then the famine begins. It starts in Egypt but spreads throughout the region, affecting all the surrounding lands just as Joseph predicted. Crops fail, the Nile's flooding becomes irregular, the earth yields less and less. As hunger begins to spread, the people cry out to Pharaoh for food, and Pharaoh tells them to go to Joseph and do whatever he says. It is a complete transfer of authority in the crisis, an acknowledgement that Joseph's wisdom is Egypt's salvation. Joseph opens the storehouses and begins to sell grain to the Egyptians. But the famine is not limited to Egypt. It spreads across the entire region, and soon people from all countries come to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine is severe everywhere. Caravans arrive from distant lands. Foreign delegations come bearing silver and goods to trade for food. Egypt, because of Joseph's foresight and administration, has become the breadbasket of the world. The nation that could have starved is instead enriched, and all of it flows through the hands of a Hebrew slave who 13 years ago lay in an Egyptian prison. Among those distant lands affected by the famine is Canaan. In Hebron, Jacob hears that there is grain in Egypt, and he says to his sons, "Why do you just keep looking at each other? I have heard that there is grain in Egypt." Go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die." It is a statement loaded with irony. Jacob is sending his sons to Egypt for salvation, without knowing that the salvation they seek will come through the son they sold. 10 of Joseph's brothers prepare for the journey. Jacob keeps Benjamin, the youngest, at home. Rachel's second son, Joseph's only full brother, has become precious to Jacob in a way that the others can sense and resent. If Joseph is dead, Benjamin is all that remains of Rachel, and Jacob will not risk losing him. The 10 brothers set out for Egypt, joining the flow of desperate people seeking food in a time of famine. They arrive in Egypt and make their way through the bureaucratic channels that Joseph has established. Eventually, they are brought before the governor himself, the powerful Egyptian official who controls all grain distribution. They bow down before him with their faces to the ground, seeking permission to buy food. They do not recognize him. More than 20 years have passed. The 17-year-old boy they threw into a cistern has become a 39-year-old Egyptian official, his head shaved in Egyptian fashion, his body clothed in Egyptian finery, speaking to them through an interpreter as if he does not understand their language. But Joseph recognizes them immediately. The moment he sees them bowing before him, the dreams of his youth flash through his mind with stunning clarity. The sheaves in the field bowing to his sheaf, the sun and moon and 11 stars bowing down to him. The dreams that seemed like juvenile fantasies, the dreams that earned him his brother's hatred, the dreams that indirectly led to his slavery, have manifested in reality. His brothers are literally bowing before him, seeking from him the sustenance they need to survive. The famine tightens its grip across the ancient world. In Canaan, an aging father faces an impossible decision, while in Egypt, a Hebrew slave turned vizier holds the destiny of nations in his hands. The stage is set for one of history's most profound family reunions, a moment where past sins collide with present desperation, where mercy battles against justified revenge. Joseph stands in his palace, surrounded by the wealth of empires, yet haunted by memories of a pit, a caravan, and chains. 22 years have passed since his brothers tore him from their father's embrace. 22 years of transformation, of suffering refined into wisdom, of pain alchemized into purpose. He has become someone his family would never recognize, speaking Egyptian, dressed in royal linen, his face painted in the style of Pharaoh's court. But beneath the veneer of Egyptian power beats the heart of a Hebrew shepherd, a son who still remembers his father's voice, a brother who still bears the invisible scars of betrayal. The first delegation arrives from Canaan on a day like any other. 10 men, weathered by travel and desperation, bow before the throne of Egypt's second-in-command. They prostrate themselves in the dust, faces pressed to the marble floor, exactly as Joseph's youthful dreams predicted all those years ago. The irony is not lost on him. The very brothers who mocked those dreams now fulfill them unknowingly, their foreheads touching the ground before the brother they condemned to slavery. Joseph recognizes them instantly. How could he not? These are the faces that filled his childhood, the voices that once called him brother before they called him dreamer with contempt. Reuben, the firstborn, hair now streaked with gray. Simeon and Levi, still bearing the hard edges of violent men. Judah, whose suggestions saved Joseph's life even as it sealed his enslavement. And the others, each one triggering a cascade of memories both tender and terrible. But they do not recognize him. How could they? The teenager they sold now stands before them as a man of 40, his face transformed by time and Egyptian custom, his voice speaking through an interpreter, though he understands every word of their Hebrew tongue. The power dynamic has completely reversed, yet Joseph reveals nothing. Something deeper is at work here, something beyond simple recognition or revenge. He accuses them of being spies. The charge is strategic, designed to probe their character, to understand who these men have become in 2 decades. Are they still the callous brothers who could eat lunch while their sibling screamed from a pit? Or has time and suffering taught them something about mercy, about loyalty, about the consequences of cruelty? Joseph must know before he reveals himself, before he entrusts them with the truth that could shatter or heal their fractured family. The brothers protest their innocence with desperate sincerity. They explain they are 10 of 12 brothers, sons of one man in Canaan. The youngest remains at home with their father, they say, and one is no more. Those 3 words pierced Joseph's carefully maintained composure. One is no more. So this is the story they told, the lie they lived with, the narrative that allowed them to look their father in the eye day after day. Jacob believes his favorite son is dead, torn apart by wild animals, reduced to blood-stained fabric and grief without end. Joseph orders them imprisoned for 3 days. In that darkness, in that confinement, the brothers taste a fraction of what their brother endured. 3 days to contemplate their past, to feel the terror of powerlessness, to understand what it means to be at the mercy of a foreign ruler who speaks a language they barely comprehend. 3 days that mirror the 3 days Joseph likely spent in the pit before the Ishmaelites arrived. When Joseph brings them out again, he has refined his test. He will keep one brother as hostage, while the others return with grain. They must bring back their youngest brother to prove they are not spies. The condition seems arbitrary to Egyptian ears, but Joseph knows its true weight. Benjamin, the only other son of Rachel, his full brother, the only one who had no part in his betrayal. Joseph must see him, must know that Jacob has another son to love, must understand the family constellation that has formed in his absence. Before the brothers can respond, something extraordinary happens. They begin speaking among themselves in Hebrew, assuming the Egyptian vizier cannot understand them. What Joseph hears next breaks something open inside him, a wound he thought had scarred over completely. They speak of guilt. They confess to one another what they have apparently never confessed before. They acknowledge their crime against Joseph, how they heard his desperate pleas for mercy and hardened their hearts. Reuben, the eldest, reminds them that he warned them not to sin against the boy, but they would not listen. Now, he declares, comes the reckoning for his blood. Joseph turns away quickly, overcome by emotion. These hardened men, capable of such cruelty, carry the weight of their sin. They have not forgotten. They have not moved on. For 22 years, they have lived with the knowledge of what they did, and the famine has brought them to interpret their suffering as divine justice. They believe God himself is calling them to account. The Egyptian interpreter continues translating their Hebrew words into Egyptian, unaware that the man on the throne understands every syllable, that each word of remorse is landing directly on the heart of the brother they betrayed. Joseph weeps, not in front of them, but turned away, his shoulders shaking with the release of decades of pain and anger and grief. Then he composes himself, turns back, and chooses Simeon to remain behind. Why Simeon? Perhaps because Simeon and Levi were the most violent, the ones who massacred the men of Shechem. Perhaps Joseph remembers Simeon as particularly cruel in the plot against him. Or perhaps it is strategic, a way to separate the brothers and observe their loyalty to one another. Simeon is bound before their eyes and taken away, and the remaining brothers are sent back to Canaan with grain and with a secret gift they will not discover until later. Joseph orders his servants to return each brother's silver to his sack of grain. It is a test within a test, a mystery that will either prove their honesty or condemn them as thieves. When the brothers stop for the night and one opens his sack to feed his donkey, he discovers the silver and cries out in terror. Their hearts sink. What is God doing to them? The question reveals their spiritual state. They see divine orchestration in these events, a cosmic settling of accounts. Back in Canaan, Jacob receives his sons with the desperate hope of a father in famine. They bring grain, but also devastating news. The Egyptian ruler spoke harshly, accused them of espionage, kept Simeon as a hostage, and demands they bring Benjamin on their next journey. When they discover all their silver has been returned in their sacks, fear multiplies. They appear as thieves to Egypt, though they are innocent. The trap tightens. Jacob's response is the cry of a man who has lost too much. Joseph is no more, Simeon is no more, and now they want to take Benjamin. Everything is against him, he laments. Reuben, in a desperate attempt to convince his father, makes a shocking offer. Kill my 2 sons if I do not bring Benjamin back safely. It is a foolish oath, revealing Reuben's impulsive nature, the same rashness that cost him his birthright years ago. Jacob refuses absolutely. Benjamin will not go to Egypt. He is the only son of Rachel remaining, at least in Jacob's belief. If harm should come to Benjamin, it would bring Jacob's gray head down to the grave in sorrow. But famine does not negotiate with grief. The grain runs out. Starvation looms. Jacob finds himself facing the same terrible arithmetic that has haunted humanity since the fall. How do you weigh present survival against potential loss? How do you choose between certain death and possible tragedy? The famine forces his hand, strips away his options, brings him to the point where he must risk everything or watch his family perish. Judah steps forward. In this moment, we see the transformation of a man. This is the same Judah who suggested selling Joseph into slavery, who later slept with his daughter-in-law thinking she was a prostitute, who carried secrets and shame. But something has changed. Judah makes a personal guarantee. He pledges his own life, his own future, his standing before his father for all time. If he does not bring Benjamin back, he will bear the blame forever. It is a binding oath, a commitment that will be tested in ways Judah cannot yet imagine. Jacob finally consents, but with elaborate precautions. Take double the silver to return what was in the sacks and to pay for new grain. Take gifts for the Egyptian ruler, the finest products of Canaan: balm, honey, spices, myrrh, pistachio nuts, almonds. Jacob is doing what he has always done, trying to manipulate outcomes through careful planning and gifts, just as he once sent gifts ahead to appease his brother Esau decades ago. Some patterns persist across lifetimes, and so they descend once more to Egypt, this time with Benjamin in their company. For Jacob, it is an act of terrible faith, releasing his beloved son into the unknown. For the brothers, it is a journey weighted with dread and guilt. For Benjamin, it is his first descent into the land that holds his brother, though he does not know it. And for Joseph, watching from his palace as reports arrive of the approaching delegation from Canaan, it is the moment he has orchestrated, the convergence he both desires and fears. When Joseph sees Benjamin among them, he moves swiftly. He orders his steward to prepare a great feast to bring these men to his own house. The brothers are terrified. Being taken to the vizier's house can only mean punishment for the silver found in their sacks. They approach the steward with desperate explanations, insisting they have brought back the silver, plus more, that they have no idea how it got into their sacks the first time. The steward's response is curious and revealing. "Peace to you," he says. "Do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. I had your silver." It is a statement that could be simple reassurance or something much deeper. Has Joseph told his steward about the God of his fathers? Has he maintained his faith even here in pagan Egypt? The steward brings Simeon out to them, provides water to wash their feet, gives feed to their donkeys. He is treating them as honored guests, not criminals. When Joseph comes home at noon, the brothers present their gifts and bow to the ground before him. Again, the dreams find fulfillment. Again, the imagery of sheaves and stars bowing down manifests in marble halls and royal presence. Joseph asks about their welfare, then inquires about their aged father. Is he still alive? The question carries such weight. For 22 years, Joseph has wondered about his father, has carried the image of Jacob's face, has perhaps imagined the grief his disappearance caused. They assure him Jacob lives and bow again in homage. Then Joseph looks up and sees Benjamin, his mother's son, his only full brother. The emotion is overwhelming. He asks, "Is this your youngest brother?" He blesses Benjamin with words that tremble with hidden meaning. "God be gracious to you, my son." Then he rushes out, seeking a private place to weep. He enters his chamber and releases the torrent of feeling, then washes his face and returns, exercising strict control over himself. The feast that follows is strange and specific. The Egyptians eat by themselves. The Hebrews eat by themselves, because Egyptians consider it detestable to eat with Hebrews. This detail reveals the cultural barriers Joseph crosses daily, living between two worlds, accepted by neither fully yet ruling over both. But the seating arrangement Joseph commands for his brothers shocks them. They are seated in exact order from firstborn to youngest. How could the Egyptian know their birth order? The mystery deepens, creating unease beneath the celebration. Joseph sends portions from his table to theirs, but Benjamin receives 5 times as much as any of the others. It is a test and a statement. How will the brothers react to favoritism shown to Rachel's younger son? Will jealousy rise again? Will resentment poison the feast as it once poisoned their family? But they eat and drink freely with Joseph. Perhaps they are too overwhelmed to notice. Perhaps time has taught them better than to resent a father's, or in this case, a ruler's, special affection. What the brothers do not know is that Joseph is preparing the ultimate test, a scenario that will reveal whether these men have truly changed, whether they have learned anything from the tragedy they inflicted, whether they would still sacrifice a brother to save themselves. Joseph commands his steward to fill the men's sacks with grain, as much as they can carry, and again to return every man's silver to his sack. But then comes the critical instruction. Place my silver cup, my personal divination cup, in the sack of the youngest. It is a setup, a frame, a situation that will force the brothers to choose between their own safety and Benjamin's welfare. The brothers leave at dawn, relieved and grateful, unaware they are walking into a trap. They have barely left the city when Joseph sends his steward after them with an accusation. Why have you repaid good with evil? The silver cup is missing, the very cup from which the master drinks and uses for divination. It is a serious charge, theft from the vizier himself, compounded by the theft of an object of power and ritual. The brothers respond with the confidence of the innocent. They protest they would never steal. Did they not bring back the silver they found in their sacks? How then could they steal silver or gold from the master's house? In their certainty, they make a rash oath. Let whoever has stolen the cup die, and the rest of us will become slaves. The steward modifies their oath, showing a measured justice they did not expect. Only the one with whom the cup is found will be a slave. The rest may go free. They quickly lower their sacks and open them, each man eager to prove his innocence. The steward searches carefully, beginning with the eldest and ending with the youngest. Sack after sack reveals only grain and returns silver, until finally he reaches Benjamin. From Benjamin's sack, he draws out the gleaming cup. The moment shatters their relief like pottery on stone. They tear their clothes in grief and desperation, the ancient gesture of unbearable anguish. Every man reloads his donkey, and they return to the city together. This detail is crucial. They do not abandon Benjamin. They do not calculate their own safety and leave him to face punishment alone. They return together, a united front, choosing solidarity over self-preservation. When they enter Joseph's house, they fall to the ground before him. Joseph confronts them with theatrical anger. What deed is this you have done? Do you not know that a man like me practices divination? The mention of divination is interesting. Joseph is playing a role, speaking the language of Egyptian power, but the irony is rich. He needs no divination. He knows exactly what happened because he orchestrated it. His true gift was never divination, but dreams interpreted by the God of his fathers. Judah becomes the spokesman. What can we say? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered our guilt. The statement operates on multiple levels. On the surface, Judah refers to the cup, but his words reach back to a deeper guilt, an older crime. We are now your slaves, Judah says, both we and the one in whose possession the cup was found. But Joseph refuses the offer. Far be it from me to do this, he replies. Only the man with the cup will be my slave. The rest of you may return in peace to your father. It is the ultimate test. Joseph is giving them permission to do to Benjamin what they once did to him, to leave a favored son in slavery while they return home free, to break their father's heart while saving their own skins. What happens next is one of the most moving speeches in all of Scripture, a moment of transformation and redemption that reverses the trajectory of an entire family's destiny. Judah approaches. The text says he came near to Joseph, a physical movement that represents a spiritual and emotional drawing close. Then Judah speaks, and his words flow with eloquent desperation, with careful reasoning, with absolute sincerity. He begins with deference. Please, my lord, let your servant speak a word. Do not be angry with your servant, for you are equal to Pharaoh himself. Then Judah recounts the entire story from his perspective. He reminds Joseph, this foreign ruler who seems to know so much about them, that they were asked about their family. He recalls how they explained their aged father and young brother, how the boy's brother was dead, and he alone was left of his mother's sons, and how their father loved him. He describes Joseph's insistence on seeing Benjamin, and their warning that the boy could not leave his father, that such a separation would kill the old man. Judah continues, explaining how they returned to Jacob and told him they could not go back without Benjamin, how the famine forced the issue, how Jacob finally consented only after Judah personally guaranteed the boy's safety. Then Judah reaches the heart of his plea. If I return to my father without the boy, when his life is bound up in the boy's life, he will die. Your servants will bring the gray head of our father down to the grave in sorrow." But Judah does not stop with an appeal to pity. He makes an offer that reveals the depth of his transformation. "I personally guaranteed his safety to my father. I said, if I do not bring him back, I will bear the blame before my father all my life. Now therefore, please let your servant remain here as a slave to my lord instead of the boy. Let the boy return with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I could not bear to see the suffering that would come upon my father. It is a complete reversal." Judah, who once suggested selling his brother into slavery to avoid direct murder, now offers himself as a slave to save his brother. Judah, who cared nothing for his father's grief 2 decades ago, now cannot bear the thought of causing Jacob pain. Judah, who acted out of self-interest and callousness, now acts with self-sacrifice and compassion. The man has been fundamentally changed, refined by time and consequence, into someone capable of heroic love. Joseph can no longer maintain his disguise. The emotional weight of Judah's speech, the evidence of genuine transformation, the love for their father and for Benjamin, it all breaks through his carefully constructed barriers. He orders all the Egyptians out of his presence. What is about to happen must happen between brothers, in the language of their fathers, without witnesses who could not possibly understand the depths of what is being revealed. When the room clears, Joseph weeps so loudly that the Egyptians outside hear it, and word spreads to Pharaoh's household. Then, through tears, he speaks in Hebrew, the words that will change everything. "I am Joseph. Does my father still live?" The brothers cannot answer. They are terrified, struck dumb by the impossibility of what they are hearing. This Egyptian ruler, this powerful stranger who has held their fates in his hands, is the brother they betrayed, the boy they sold, the son their father mourned as dead. The shock is total. The reversal is complete. The powerful are revealed as victims of their own past sins. The one they thought dead holds the power of life and death over them. Joseph sees their terror and speaks again, asking them to come closer. They approach, hesitant, disbelieving. "I am your brother Joseph," he says, "the one you sold into Egypt." The acknowledgement is direct, unflinching. He does not pretend it did not happen. He does not minimize their crime. He names it clearly, but without anger, without accusation, almost as a simple statement of history. Then Joseph does something extraordinary. He reframes the entire narrative of his suffering through the lens of divine providence. "Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves for selling me here," he tells them, "because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. The famine has been in the land for 2 years, and there are still 5 years without harvest. God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance." Listen to the theological weight of this statement. Joseph is not denying human responsibility or excusing their sin, but he is placing their actions within a larger narrative of divine purpose. "It was not you who sent me here, but God." Their evil intent became, in God's hands, an instrument of salvation. Their attempt to destroy him became the mechanism of their own preservation. The very thing they meant for harm, God meant for good. This is not cheap forgiveness or easy reconciliation. 22 years of suffering stand between the pit and this palace. 22 years of slavery, false accusation, prison, and exile from everything Joseph loved. But Joseph has come to see his life not as a tragedy, but as a mission, not as a series of injustices, but as a divinely orchestrated rescue plan that would save not just his family, but entire nations. He has been made father to Pharaoh, lord of all Egypt, ruler over the land. God did this, Joseph insists, to position him precisely where he needed to be when famine struck. Now Joseph issues instructions born of urgency and love. "Hurry back to my father and tell him," his son Joseph says, "God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me without delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you and your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds and all you have. I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise you and your household, and all who belong to you, will become destitute." Then Joseph embraces Benjamin and weeps, and Benjamin weeps with him. He kisses all his brothers and weeps over them. Only after this, after the tears and embraces, after the physical reassurance of forgiveness and love, Do his brothers talk with him? The text says they talked with him, suggesting an opening of communication that had been frozen by terror and guilt. The silence breaks. The relationship begins to rebuild. When Pharaoh hears that Joseph's brothers have come, he is pleased. This detail reveals the relationship between Joseph and Pharaoh. The king is not threatened by Joseph's family connections. He does not fear divided loyalty. Instead, he generously offers them the best of Egypt, tells them to bring their father and households, promises to give them the best of the land of Egypt, and they will eat the fat of the land. He provides carts for transport, supplies for the journey, and festival clothing for each brother. To Benjamin, he gives 300 shekels of silver and 5 sets of clothes. To his father, he sends gifts befitting a patriarch: 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread and other provisions for his journey. Joseph sends his brothers off with a final word of caution. Do not quarrel on the way. It is a telling instruction. Joseph knows his brothers. He knows their capacity for conflict, their tendency to blame and accuse. He knows that the revelation of his identity might trigger recriminations among them. Who suggested selling him? Who could have stopped it but did not? Joseph wants reconciliation, not a new round of division. The brothers make the journey back to Canaan carrying an impossible message. When they arrive and tell Jacob that Joseph is still alive and is ruler of all Egypt, his heart grows numb. He does not believe them. How could he? For 22 years, he has lived with the certainty of Joseph's death. He has mourned, has refused comfort, has wrapped his grief around himself like a garment. The announcement that Joseph lives seems too good to be true, a cruel joke or a delusion. But then they tell him everything Joseph said, and he sees the carts Joseph sent to carry him back. The text says the spirit of their father Jacob revived. Physical evidence breaks through the numbness of grief. If the carts are real, perhaps the message is real. Perhaps the impossible is true. Jacob declares, I am convinced. My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. The journey of Jacob to Egypt is freighted with significance. This is not just an old man traveling to see his son. This is the fulfillment of prophecies given to Abraham and Isaac. This is the beginning of Israel's sojourn in Egypt, the start of a 400-year arc that will lead through slavery to Exodus, through suffering to nationhood. Jacob is 70 years removed from his own flight to Haran, from his own exile and return. Now he embarks on a final journey, not as a fugitive, but as a father summoned by a son he thought dead. At Beersheba, Jacob stops to offer sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. That night, God speaks to him in a vision. Jacob, Jacob, God calls, using his name twice in the pattern of intimate address. Here I am, Jacob replies, the response of availability and faith. God identifies himself as the God of your father, then gives both assurance and prophecy. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again. It is a promise that spans generations. Jacob will die in Egypt, but his descendants will return. The journey is necessary, part of the divine plan, but it is not permanent. God's purposes for this family, for this nation being formed, extend beyond Egypt back to the land of promise. And there is a personal word of comfort. Joseph's own hand will close your eyes. Jacob will not die alone in a foreign land. He will die in the presence of his beloved son, the one he thought lost forever. The reunion between Joseph and Jacob is described with remarkable emotional power. When Joseph's chariot approaches, Jacob sees his son for the first time in over 2 decades. Joseph is no longer the 17-year-old boy in the ornate robe. He is a man of 40, powerful, Egyptian in appearance, but still unmistakably Joseph. Joseph throws his arms around his father and weeps for a long time. The text emphasizes the duration of his weeping. This is not a brief emotional release, but a prolonged outpouring of 22 years of separation, grief, longing, and finally reunion. Jacob's words are profound in their simplicity. Now I am ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive. It is the statement of a man who has received back what he thought was lost beyond recovery. He has touched the face of his son. He has heard his voice. The impossible has been made real. Whatever comes next, this moment is enough. Joseph settles his family in Goshen, the best part of Egypt for shepherds, somewhat separated from the main Egyptian population. This separation will prove crucial for maintaining the Hebrew identity over the coming centuries. He presents 5 of his brothers to Pharaoh, and they present themselves as shepherds, requesting permission to settle in Goshen because the famine is severe in Canaan. Pharaoh grants the request and even asks if any of them are capable men who could oversee his own livestock. The Hebrews are being welcomed, honored, given the best land and opportunities. Joseph also brings his father to meet Pharaoh. The scene is remarkable. Jacob, this shepherd from Canaan, this man who has lived by trickery and been tricked in return, this survivor of family conflict and personal tragedy, stands before the most powerful ruler on earth. And Jacob blesses Pharaoh. Twice, the text mentions it. When he enters and when he leaves, Jacob blesses Pharaoh. The lesser is blessed by the greater. In the economy of God's kingdom, the Hebrew patriarch carries a blessing that even Pharaoh needs. When Pharaoh asks Jacob's age, Jacob responds that he is 130 years old, and his years have been few and difficult. They do not compare to the years of his fathers. It is a poignant self-assessment. Jacob knows his life has been marked by struggle, deception, loss, and pain. He does not romanticize his journey, but he also knows, though perhaps not fully yet, that his struggles have been woven into a larger story of redemption. The famine continues its devastating work. Joseph administers Egypt's grain reserves with brilliant efficiency. He sells grain first for silver. Then, when the silver runs out, he trades grain for livestock. When the livestock is exhausted, he accepts land in exchange for food until Pharaoh owns all the land of Egypt except that of the priests. Finally, Joseph moves the people to cities from one end of Egypt to the other, concentrating population and streamlining administration. He gives them seed to plant, requiring 1/5 of the harvest to go to Pharaoh, allowing them to keep 4/5 for themselves and their families. It is a system that saves lives while consolidating power. The Egyptians themselves acknowledge Joseph's wisdom. "You have saved our lives," they say. "May we find favor in the eyes of our Lord? We will be in bondage to Pharaoh." Joseph has transformed the entire economic structure of Egypt, ensuring not just survival, but a new social order that will last for generations. Meanwhile, Israel settles in Goshen, acquires property, is fruitful, and increases greatly in number. The contrast is striking. While Egyptians sell everything to survive, the Hebrews are prospering, multiplying, establishing themselves. The seeds of future conflict are being planted even in this time of blessing. A people set apart, growing in strength, will eventually be perceived as a threat by rulers who do not remember Joseph. Jacob lives in Egypt 17 years, bringing his total lifespan to 147 years. As death approaches, he calls Joseph to him and makes him swear an oath. "Do not bury me in Egypt. Carry me out of Egypt, and bury me where my fathers are buried." The request reveals Jacob's understanding of identity and destiny. Egypt is not home, the land of promise is home. Even in death, Jacob wants to rest with Abraham and Isaac, to make a physical statement about where his people truly belong. Joseph swears the oath, and Jacob bows in worship at the head of his bed. Then, in a later visit, Joseph brings his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, to receive their grandfather's blessing. Jacob is nearly blind, but when he sees the boys, he asks who they are. Joseph identifies them as the sons God has given him in Egypt. Jacob asks Joseph to bring them close so he can bless them. What follows is a scene of deliberate reversal and prophetic insight. Joseph positions the boys carefully, Manasseh the firstborn at Jacob's right hand, and Ephraim the younger at his left. But when Jacob reaches out, he crosses his hands, placing his right hand on Ephraim's head and his left on Manasseh's, even though Manasseh is the firstborn. Joseph sees this and is displeased, trying to move his father's hand from Ephraim to Manasseh. "Not so, my father," Joseph protests. "This one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." But Jacob refuses. "I know, my son, I know. He will also become a people, and he will also become great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a multitude of nations." Jacob is deliberately choosing the younger over the older, continuing a pattern that has marked his entire family. Isaac was chosen over Ishmael. Jacob was chosen over Esau. Joseph was favored over his older brothers. Now Ephraim will be placed before Manasseh. It is a reminder that God's purposes do not always follow human expectations or natural order. Jacob blesses both boys, saying, May the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked faithfully, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has delivered me from all harm, may he bless these boys. The blessing is deeply personal, tracing the line of faith from Abraham through Isaac to Jacob himself, now extending to the next generation. Jacob also says these boys will be called by his name and the names of Abraham and Isaac, and they will increase greatly on the earth. The blessing of multiplication, the promise made to Abraham, continues forward. Then Jacob gathers all his sons for his final prophecy and blessing. What follows is a detailed accounting of each son's character, destiny, and the future of their tribes. To Reuben, the firstborn, Jacob declares he will not excel because of his instability and sin with Jacob's concubine. To Simeon and Levi, Jacob pronounces scattering for their violence, remembering the massacre at Shechem. But to Judah, Jacob gives the most significant blessing. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. It is a messianic prophecy, pointing forward to a king from Judah's line who will rule not just Israel, but all nations. The tribe that produced the man who offered himself as a slave to save his brother will produce the King of Kings. Jacob blesses each son according to what is appropriate for him, mixing prophecy with assessment, hope with warning. When he finishes, he gives final instructions. I am about to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave in the field of Ephron the Hittite, the cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre in Canaan, where Abraham and Sarah are buried, where Isaac and Rebekah are buried, and where I buried Leah. Then Jacob draws his feet up into the bed, breathes his last, and is gathered to his people. Joseph throws himself on his face, weeping and kissing him. The grief is profound. Then Joseph directs the physicians to embalm his father, and they take 40 days to do so, while the Egyptians mourn Jacob 70 days. The honors given to Jacob are extraordinary, befitting the father of Egypt's savior. When the mourning period ends, Joseph asks Pharaoh's court for permission to go bury his father in Canaan as he swore to do. Pharaoh agrees, and a massive funeral procession heads north. The company includes Egyptian officials, dignitaries, chariots, and horsemen, along with all of Joseph's household and his brothers and his father's household. They leave only their children and flocks in Goshen. When they reach the threshing floor of Atad near the Jordan, they hold a great and solemn ceremony of mourning for 7 days. The Canaanites who live there see the mourning and say, "This is a solemn ceremony of mourning by the Egyptians." They call the place Abel Mizraim, mourning of Egypt. It is a powerful testimony to the respect Egypt shows to this Hebrew patriarch. Jacob's sons carry him to Canaan and bury him in the cave of Machpelah, exactly as he requested. The promise is kept. The patriarch rests with his fathers in the land of promise, making a statement about identity and belonging that his descendants will remember for generations. After the burial, after returning to Egypt, the brothers are seized with fear. Now that their father is dead, Joseph might take revenge. The protection of Jacob's presence is gone. What if Joseph has been waiting for this moment? They send a message to Joseph, claiming Jacob left instructions before he died, asking Joseph to forgive his brothers for their sins and wrongs. They appeal to him to forgive the sins of the servants of the God of his father. When Joseph receives this message, he weeps. The fact that his brothers still fear him after everything, still cannot fully believe in his forgiveness, breaks his heart. When they come to him in person and throw themselves down before him, offering to be his slaves, Joseph responds with words that summarize the entire theology of his story. "Do not be afraid," he says. "Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." He reassures them and speaks kindly to them. This is the culmination of Joseph's spiritual journey. He recognizes that while his brothers acted with evil intent, God was working through even their evil actions to accomplish divine purposes. Joseph does not excuse their sin. He names it clearly. "You intended to harm me." But he places that human evil within the context of divine sovereignty and redemptive purpose. God intended it for good. The same action, viewed from earth, was a crime. Viewed from heaven, it was a rescue plan. Joseph lives to see his great-great-grandchildren through Ephraim, and the children of Machir son of Manasseh are placed at birth on Joseph's knees, signifying adoption and blessing. When Joseph is 110 years old, he gathers his brothers one final time. "I am about to die," he tells them, "but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Then Joseph makes the Israelites swear an oath. "When God comes to your aid, you must carry my bones up from this place." It is the same request his father made, the same understanding that Egypt is not home, that the promises of God are tied to the land of Canaan, that even in death, the patriarchs want to rest in the place God designated for his people. Joseph dies at 110, and they embalm him and place him in a coffin in Egypt. For over 300 years, that coffin will remain in Egypt, a silent testimony, a reminder of a promise yet to be fulfilled, a pledge waiting for redemption. The story of Joseph ends, but its implications reverberate through all of Scripture and human history. Here is a man who suffered unjustly, who was betrayed by those closest to him, who descended into slavery and imprisonment through no fault of his own, yet who emerged as a savior of nations. Here is a story of providence that does not erase human responsibility, but works through it, that acknowledges real evil while asserting ultimate divine purpose. Joseph's life teaches that suffering can have meaning without being deserved, that pain can be redemptive without being good, that God can work through the worst of human intentions to accomplish the best of divine purposes. It teaches forgiveness not as forgetting or minimizing evil, but as releasing vengeance to God while choosing mercy and restoration. The story also teaches patient faithfulness. Joseph did not scheme his way to power. He served faithfully in slavery, maintained integrity in temptation, interpreted dreams in prison, and administered Egypt with wisdom and justice. At each stage, he was faithful with what he had been given, and God expanded his influence. From slave to prisoner to palace administrator to vizier, each role was preparation for the next. Joseph's story prefigures the greater story of redemption that will unfold through Israel's history and beyond. Like Joseph, Jesus would be rejected by his brothers, betrayed for silver, condemned though innocent, and through that suffering become the Savior not just of Israel but of the world. Like Joseph, Jesus would tell his persecutors that what they intended for evil, God intended for good. The cross, like the pit and the prison, would become the instrument of salvation. The movement from Canaan to Egypt sets the stage for the Exodus, for the formation of Israel as a nation, for the giving of the law and the conquest of the promised land. Joseph's wisdom in bringing his family to Egypt saves them from famine, but it also positions them for the slavery that will come. His success becomes, generations later, a source of Egyptian fear. The people he saved will eventually oppress his descendants. Yet even this fits the pattern God revealed to Abraham. Your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated 400 years. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. Joseph's bones in that coffin are a promissory note, a guarantee that God has not forgotten, that the story does not end in Egypt. In the final analysis, Joseph's story is about the sovereignty of God working through the freedom of human beings, about suffering that leads to salvation, about family dysfunction redeemed by grace, about dreams that seem dead but are merely dormant, awaiting the appointed time of fulfillment. It is about a God who sees the end from the beginning, who can take a teenager's arrogant dreams and refine them through suffering into a humility that saves nations. Joseph lived 110 years, long enough to see his children's children, long enough to witness the multiplication of Israel in Egypt, long enough to know his life had meaning and purpose. He began as a favored son whose arrogance contributed to his brother's hatred. He emerged as a wise administrator whose forgiveness and provision saved the very family that betrayed him. The journey from privilege through suffering to wisdom is the journey of transformation that produces not just success but character, not just power but mercy. As the coffin of Joseph rests in Egypt, waiting for Moses to carry it out at the Exodus, it stands as a monument to faith in God's promises, to the belief that present circumstances do not determine future destiny, that God is always working, even when invisible, especially when incomprehensible, moving history toward redemption, toward home, toward the fulfillment of every promise spoken to the fathers. The story of Joseph, from slave to ruler, from pit to palace, from betrayal to reconciliation, remains one of the most powerful narratives of human experience, illuminated by divine purpose. It assures us that no suffering is wasted in God's economy, that no pain is meaningless in God's plan, that the darkest nights can precede the brightest dawns, and that the God who was with Joseph in the pit and the prison and the palace is with us, still, working all things together for good, writing stories of redemption from the broken pieces of our lives, fulfilling dreams we thought were dead, bringing us home to the promises that have been waiting since before we were born.